Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Managing Change, presented by Deborah Ferris, President of Practice and Liability Consultants. Please be aware that there will be a question and answer portion at the end of today's webinar. Please type your questions in the question box located on the right of your screen, and they will be answered in the order received. Additionally, if you would like a copy of the presentation slides to print and take notes on during the presentation, please find them on the right of your screen in the Handouts section. They will also be emailed to all participants following the completion of today's webinar, as well as a recorded version will be available on the website for members only. Again, we would like to thank you for attending, and I will now turn things over to Deborah.
Thank you and welcome. I'm so delighted to be here this afternoon. I love this quote. I think it's so true, especially in the medical office, is that nobody likes change except for a wet baby. So I've joked for years that change is the worst swear word in the medical office. It just seems like nobody likes change at all, but it's inevitable. And I love this quote also. I've always used it. John F. Kennedy, those who look only to the past or the present are certain to miss the future. Change is the law of life. It just is inevitable, and we have to deal with it and do the best job that we can. But as managers, and again, you've probably heard me talk about my managing up. You either have to manage up to your physicians or manage down to your staff, and that's managing change both ways, and it's difficult. So we're going to talk today about some of the ways to implement change that are successful and are less difficult for your staff and for your doctors. So there's so many things going on today. You've got all these market force changes. I mean, some of you are having to change to your second or third EMR, which is never fun. There's so much going on, being acquisitions by hospitals, group, and then, of course, private equity has moved into many, many specialties, particularly derm and ophthalmology, and I think they're getting into ortho now too, and urology, and some of those specialties. So that's a whole nother aspect. And then, many doctors are merging, which makes a lot of sense to try to stay private and, stay strong. And then you, of course, managing your increasing overhead. Most of the MGMA polls, and I love those little texting polls that we get all the time, show that the overhead keeps rising while reimbursement staying somewhat stable. So we've got the decreasing or stable reimbursement, and then we have so many different operations changes. And wow, there's just so much coming down the pike with all the apps and artificial intelligence and everything that's going to happen that's going to change with the operations. And we have to be prepared for that too. And then, of course, the bane of most practice managers' life is all the labor law challenges, staffing, hiring, things like that. And then we're going to talk at the end a little bit about physician and manager burnout. So everybody talks a lot about the physicians, but I also see that the managers are pretty burned out from all this as well, all the change. And then we're going to touch briefly on risky physician behavior, which is becoming more of an issue, and that many managers are having to deal with that too. So it's all of those things. And I kind of joke, I say, wow, most managers and administrators feel like this. I mean, you're trying to do 40 things at once, and spinning those plates and making sure that none of them drop. So that's very common for the medical office today. So what are we going to do about introducing change? There is a process for this, and I've really found that you have to consult all the physician partners and the staff, getting all their suggestions, thinking about the alternatives, involve them in the process. Nobody likes change when it's really foisted upon them. They like to be a participant in it. So your job as the administrator is that you really have to describe that change, the reason, the purpose, the advantages, the disadvantages, all the things that could go wrong. And this is the most important step, is that you have to broach this. You have to say, what are you afraid of? What are we worried that's going to happen? How are you feeling about this? Because if you don't do this step, there's going to be resistance, and that's really a part of a problem. So we're going to say, okay, let's talk about this. Let's make lists of all these possible problems so that we can tackle those and make sure that they're not going to be a problem. And then at some point, and I always talk about this, a good practice administrator or management is a good salesperson. And at some point, you have to ask for the order or ask for the commitment to try. And that is so critical. So, I kind of joke, I'll diverse for just a second. I've always talked about this, is that we know that there are, and hopefully I don't have a slide on this already. I do these so much, I forget sometimes. But, there's a third of people that are usually early adopters, and a third of people that are fence sitters, and a third are naysayers. So it's your job as administrator to get the early adopters on board by asking for the order, asking for that commitment to try. Who's going to be one of these, who's going to be, can I count on to give this the old college try? And then wait. Somebody is going to realize that it's in their best interest to make you happy, and they're going to raise their hand and say, yes, I think it's a good idea, I'll give it a try. So you get the early adopters on board, the first third. Then the fence sitters realize it's in their best interest to always get on board too, so they come on board. So now you've got 2/3 on board, and the naysayers are in the minority, and they sort of realize that it's not going to look good for them to be in the bottom third, so they'll come along too. So that's how you get the staff on board. And you can do the same thing with the physicians too, but I really find that I try to use analogies with physicians as much as I can, and try to create a scenario where they're going to say yes, for something, and then they can say yes to, whatever it is you're proposing. So I always, gently remind them that they're not practicing medicine the same way that they did 15 or 20 years ago, that don't they readily embrace evidence-based medicine. Yes, of course I do. I read the journals. And aren't you always willing to be held to the standard of care for your medical specialty? Certainly for risk management and malpractice prevention, they have to be practicing within the standard of care. So then I usually say what happens when you're in the OR and your equipment isn't working? What do you do? And, I throw a fit, and I call up the director of nursing and, blah, 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 and, on and on. And I said, well, that's sort of the way your staff is too. They have to have all of their equipment working in good order, and it has to be up to date. It has to be within the standard of care on the business side, just like you have to have the standard of care in the operating room or, whatever it is in medicine. And that maybe we need to upgrade or reinvest in our electronic medical records, our phone system, our copiers, our printers, our computers, whatever it may be, because we need to, business side changing and improving just like the clinical side does. So use those analogies. You have to talk physician language to physicians, and that usually works with them. And then they start laughing usually when I say, yeah, I know how you'd be in the OR if you didn't have your equipment. That happened to me. I had a wrist surgery, and my I forgot to turn off my phone. I'm going to turn this off here. Just a second. Just please. I forgot to turn off the office phone. Okay, sorry about that. And I want you to make sure that you, like I said, are employing good sales techniques, and you are going forward with that. And like I said, an effective manager is really a great salesperson. They're persuasive, they're confident, they believe in your product and idea, and what you're really trying to do, and all good salespeople are creating that desire for change. They're painting a picture that's saying, wouldn't it be wonderful if you had this and you didn't have to do any of this anymore? In other words, you really are creating a canvas that they can see your vision for change, and you're communicating the benefits of this change as well. So you have to think this through, and a good administrator is going to be prepared. You're going to rehearse this, and you're going to go through this about what are all the benefits, what are the objections that are going to come up, so that I can overcome those objections with data and information. And then again, you're asking for the order, you're delivering the product, and what you're really trying to do is, with your physicians and your managers, you're creating long-term trusting relationships that you are so prepared and you're going to be confident about this. I was just, interviewing a potential manager yesterday, and she was talking about how she was so prepared when they switched from Theory MR to Epic. that the Epic people even said when they came in, wow, this is the smoothest transition we've ever had. It was because she was very, very prepared for this change and had done all of her homework ahead of time, and she was quite proud of that. So read sales techniques on books and trainings on sales. It really is an excellent webinar to probably do too with an experienced salesperson. Okay, so we have to be innovators as managers too, and that's to run that business better, to absolutely grow the business revenue and volume, and really transform the business. Most hospitals now have like a transformational officer now. I'm always surprised about that, but they really do, because they recognize that they have to have someone that's leading, transforming, innovating, and creating and implementing change. So we need to be that transformational manager as well. So I'm going to share with you some things that I found that I thought were really good, and I like this particular article, so all the kudos go to them. But I thought it was very, very well worthwhile to share with you. And 8 ways to manage change in the workplace. And I think this is so key. I mean, again, you have to plan ahead. You can't just, we do so much crisis management in medical practices, and I always try to encourage my administrators to have some quiet time, maybe at the end of the week or the first of the next week, where you have some quiet time that you're not interrupted, that you can really think and plan and figure out, what is the next week or 2 weeks going to be, my short-term planning and my long-term planning. So please give yourself permission to this. And I actually had a manager that did this, and she put a sign on her door that says, under penalty of death, unless it's a dire emergency, don't interrupt me when I'm doing my planning. So it was kind of a joke, but it was also, to remind everybody that she does need that quiet time to do that. So plan for that change. You need to spell out the objectives and the mission and all that, and change management plan, really articulating all this. Set the goal. Tell your employees that they're going to work better with these concrete goals that are achievable, and they need to be able to see their roles and what this means, what it means for them, their coworkers, all of this. And that's your job, is to articulate that, where the company is now and where the leadership sees it to the future. As I said, your job is to create vision, and you're going to articulate why that company needs to change and the shifting market forces. Don't overlook this. Your staff want to know these things, and that's why it's so essential that you have meetings, you're updating these people, you're emailing them with things, all this. So again, defining the change. It's not always completely put together at the beginning, and you may need to refine that, but that's what you're going to involve the team in saying, I want you to help participate with this, and if you see some things that might potentially go wrong, let's deal with it, and let's try a few different things. And again, you have to do updates, because you don't want the rumor mill to start, and then you get those naysayers going, and they're going to, be detrimental to that change. So you do need to celebrate the old, particularly for those employees that maybe worked hard on, implementing the last EHR or, a process or procedure. They're going to perceive that as a major slap in the face, and they're going to be, the grumblers that are going to mess it all up. So, you have to recognize that such work happened. It was important. It has meaning, and that we really appreciate all those people that worked hard on this, and we hope that we'll get them on board for the next change, because those underappreciated employees, they're going to have a hard time embracing the new change. So you need to tell everybody, we don't know what might happen. There might be things that pop up that we're not sure of, but we're going to deal with them. And it might be a challenge, but we're going to try to identify that early and try to correct it and work on it. And we hope that you'll participate in that. And then, of course, employees. It's, as a manager, you always have to listen. And I heard one of the best. He was a football coach, and he became a big consultant in the Silicon Valley up here. And he really was a good team leader and coach of everything. And the favorite thing that I remember of that, because it's so simple, he said, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them in that proportion. And I'll never forget that. I thought that was so perfect, that we do need to work on listening more instead of talking all the time. So please remember that. And I can't remember the name of the guy, but he's a very famous football coach turned consultant. Okay, so frontline supervisors to C-suite leaders, you need to listen, validate them, and even if you can't address your concerns, write it down and get back to them. So that's the most important thing. Always be using your Outlook or whatever it is to make sure that you are going to address people and remember that. Okay, here's my slide. There we go. Well, we already talked about it. So that's when your key influences are. That's what you need to do. You have key players that have earned that respect, so get them on board fast, and that's really important. And that's probably the most critical thing, is that those key influencers, the early adopters. Okay, adjust or set new performance objectives. You need to translate changes into performance appraisals, assessments, compensation, all of that. And, again, you can use a little positive manipulation, and that you are going to reward those early adopters, and you will remember that when it comes time for their performance appraisal, that they were willing participants, they were enthusiastic and on board. And so they'll remember that. So I like this too, is that this was another really great article if you want to take a look at that. And this administrator said that, she realized that some of the staff were, kind of grumbling and moaning. So she said, once a week you can visit Pity City, but you're not allowed to move there. And I thought that was really funny. So, just acknowledge that, okay, they can have some groaning, moaning, that, this is the way it was and it was really good, but you can't move to that location. You can only visit it. So tips for staff and physician meetings. It's so important to set those good advantages or agendas in advance with time frames for discussion. I've been on many boards, and it is really frustrating to be in meetings where everything is out of control. Things are repeated and multiple times. I like to go to meetings that there is agendas with time frames of discussion, and the facilitator moves it along. And if they get off target, you move it to the parking lot for next time for the agenda, and that you tend to run meetings like with Robert's Rules of Order. I'm always so surprised when my physicians do not run their board meetings with Robert's Rules of Order. It's a very, very good way of getting things done. And so I would hope that you will try to encourage your physician board to run like that. And there's some simple Robert Rules of Order. So please take a look at that and get that book. And it's really simple. It's basically a discussion. Someone makes a motion, 7 seconds, you vote on it, and you move on. So work with your MD, president, or managing partner to control those meetings. If they're not good with it, this is your managing up part, where you're going to teach the physician how to be a good meeting president. And I actually worked with an orthopedic group where the guy was, those meetings were out of control, and we got a bone, and that was his gavel. And when they got out of order, he would rap on the table with the bone, and that made everybody laugh, and then they'd settle down. But you do have to have some ground rules for meetings, and ask people for items of the agendas. This is for both of them, all the way around. But you have to say, when I go in to even work with physicians, I set ground rules right from the beginning, and we laugh and we kind of joke about it, but it is important, because I want them to know that I'm serious about how I'm going to facilitate this meeting, and that we can't let it run out of control, and we can't let somebody be, no sidebars where everybody's talking and chatting, and I absolutely insist that, and for staff and doctors, nobody is going to attack another person. If they do, they're going to be asked to leave, because that's just not appropriate, especially for staff, as they're going to fear these meetings and they won't want to participate. And with staff, when we're talking about change and everything, you can never let them degenerate into gripe sessions. And that's part of your ground rules, that you have the list of what you want them to do, and they have to sign it, that they're going to agree to it. And if anybody starts griping, you, as the facilitator, have to say, I appreciate, what you're saying. We can bring up any problems. We're never going to attack one person for this. But our rule is if you bring up a problem, you have to think of at least one possible solution. What do you suggest for your solution? And wait. And wait till they say something. You can't just gripe, you just kind of joke about it. Remember, our rule is you can't just gripe without coming up with at least one possible idea to solve that. And then write your decisions up for the policy manual. So all these things, the changing EMR, that's really difficult. Many of you have gone, like I said, on your second or third one, and I can only say that the two important features are always stability of the company and software support. So you need to do your research to make sure that they're going to be in business, they're going to stay in business, and what is the support level. And then you have to pick a super user. It can be you, or it can be someone else that's really good with that. But you always have to have a champion super user that people can always rely on, that they're going to know that better than anybody else. So what you can also do is research the current year CLOS. It's an independent rating organization for the EMR rankings for small or large medical practices. That's a really good way to try to figure that out. But most importantly, you always have to redesign your workflow first. So making sure you have good Lean, Six Sigma type processes so that then the EMR can add on to that. And make sure that you are prepared first with your checklist of elements that you want this EMR to solve, and ask each vendor to respond. So you can get swayed by their sales pitch, but if you have your checklist, you're going to say, okay, what does it do for this? What does it do for that? Is there a practice management and EMR that can catch a missing encounter? That's a critical feature if you have integrated systems, so you don't lose charges. That's probably one of the most important things that you want to always have in a PM and any HR, so that they're integrated for the greatest value. That's so important. Okay, other market force changes. What are you going to do? This is something you're going to have to help your physicians with. Some of the pros and cons and advantages and disadvantages of staying private, being acquired by a hospital, a foundation, a larger group, or private equity. And in terms of private equity, that can be a good strategy for physicians who are, say, for example, a solo doctor that's maybe 2 to 3 years from retirement. It's very hard to transition a practice in California and to sell them and transition them, so that is not a bad strategy if you think about doing that, and then they'll bring in another doctor, and they want the senior doctor to help train that new one and get them going and everything. It's sort of an okay strategy for less than 10 years, and I think it's pretty much an iffy strategy for more than 10 years. So I always try to encourage my physicians, before you jump on this and they're going to give you $2 million for your practice, you really have to know the whole thing. You have to research the company thoroughly, find out how long they're going to hold it, because most of them only hold it for 3 years and then they sell to another company and turn it over. And each time they want to make their 15% on return on their investment. And who gets squeezed? The MDs and managers. Just talk to some of your dermatology people that have gone through this, and they will agree with what I'm saying, is that this is what the strategy is. So be very careful with that. And, I try to explain to physicians with the long term is that you have to think about, well, if you get that $2 million, then you pay taxes on it, what are you going to have left? And then, maybe you were making at the 90th percentile of net income and maybe making $200,000 or $300,000 more than your peers. Well, they're going to dump you down to the median level, and so you're going to lose that $200,000 or $300,000 a year. So how long do you have before that would supersede the what you get out of this? So you really have to help them see the long-term ramifications of this if they've got more than 2 or 3 years to go. So that's something that you're going to be seeing a lot. It's really popular right now, and it's really in the vogue. So hospitals employing physicians, obviously in California, they have to do that through the foundation model. But the New England Journal of Medicine, article, they lose 150 to 200 grand per year for the first 3 years, and their losses decrease, but they're still persisting. So how long is this sustainable before, again, incomes start stabilizing and so forth? So again, talk to your physicians about this and explain all this. So that's the other thing that I try to encourage my doctors and my managers when you're thinking about this. And there's good and bad strategies for everything. So I'm not biased one way or another. But, really think about this when you're looking at what are all the things that are important to physicians in a private practice versus a hospital foundation, and who's driving this? Is it physician driven or is it hospital foundation driven? And I was just, again, talking to somebody yesterday about, how unhappy the doctors are in a foundation model right now. And we're seeing some movement where they're escaping. So, again, it has to be physician driven to make them happy over the long term. So all these things are very important. And, depending on your specialty, I always talk about this. I'm based in Napa now. I was in San Francisco for most of my it'll be 35 years I've been doing this in my own business in May 1st. And I live in Napa now, and I love it. And my office is in Napa. But the hospital is a Catholic hospital. And most of the doctors, the OBs, have gone to the foundation model. So guess what? There's a lot of religious affiliation, loss of freedom there for certain services. And so that's kind of an issue, for a town, which they don't have those things anymore. So that can be very an interesting process. Okay, so if you want to stay private, a great way is thinking about merging with another practice or group, but that should never be done just for money. Just like a marriage, money is the biggest reason for divorce. So how you spend money, how you make money, how you all of that, cash versus credit, so you really have to go through all of this. I was involved in a possible merger between two large groups, an internal medicine subspecialty. And the one doctor that was driving this from the other group was that he was just all interested in how they could stick it to the payers, and that was the biggest reason why they needed to do that. And yes, that's one reason, but that's not the only reason why you want to merge. And when the cultures are so different and the way that they run themselves, it wasn't a good fit. So never should it be just about making money or trying to get better reimbursement or anything like that. I always say it's a process, and it should not be rushed for those things. And I find in my career that the doctors that have had I call them the C's, the courage to communicate, confront, and compromise, have the best working relationships, and they do it in a very professional way. So it is really important to think about all these things, and it's pretty much like getting married. You have to date, and then you go steady, and then you get engaged, and then you write a prenup in case it doesn't work, and then you get married. So it's very, very much the similar type thing. So you want to choose your partners wisely with complementary business advantages. You must respect them all medically. Critically important. I was involved with another orthopedic merger, and lo and behold, some of the doctors said, well, we want this guy to merge with us, but after we merge, we don't want him to do surgery anymore because we're pretty concerned about how old he is and they shouldn't be doing surgery anymore. And I said, well, you can't just spring that on somebody. After you've merged, you have to deal with this now. Either talk about it now or disinvite him, but that is not fair to that person to, spring this on them after the thing. So I usually do a confidential questionnaire, and I ask some of these things, and I'm the only one that sees this because I want each doctor to tell me honestly, how do you feel about these people? Is there anything that you worry about? You've got to get to that, and you have to like them. If you didn't like the way that they acted in meetings at the hospital, how is that going to be any different than when they're, in your group? So you have to like them, and you have to mostly respect their medical philosophy, but also their business philosophy. So we talk a lot about that too. And if somebody's always playing it too close to the vest and wanting to have their check now, today, no problem, that's going to be a problem for the other doctors that maybe have a little bit of a cushion. So these are some of the good reasons to consider merging and thinking about this change. And it could be increased contracting opportunities, but like I said, not the only one, but that can certainly help. And I certainly find that groups of 10 or more seem to have some contracting advantage. So if you're looking to merge, 10 or more seems to be a good number that you can really do something with renegotiation. Overhead reduction, that definitely you should be looking toward that. In other words, a group without walls where you don't make any changes with reducing some rent or staff, it's not going to be probably that successful. And then call reduction. That certainly is a big advantage, and ability to recruit new doctors. New doctors are more comfortable, young ones, going into a group situation that has more stability. And then certainly buy, sell, ability to sell the practice to other people, other doctors coming in, or possibly other entities. So you can absolutely spread the capital equipment purchases. You have access to capital. You absolutely can hire a higher level administrator that you can split the cost with more doctors, oftentimes better benefits for staff, and maybe now they can fund a 401k with profit sharing. And most importantly, you can spread the management responsibilities of the physicians when you have a bigger group. And my best and most hysterical story is that I was merging some otolaryngologists, and we were deciding to spread out their different responsibilities, and one of the doctors was not there at that meeting, so they gave him all the HR responsibility. And he said the next time, I will never miss a meeting again. And he's still the HR person, but he's gotten used to it, and he's actually very good at it. But it was pretty funny all the way around. But in any case, reasons to merge. This is another good reason. If something happens to you, I had some cardiologists that in 1 year, one of them had a bypass and one of them fell and broke his leg. So the new partner, thank goodness, was able to pitch in and cover some of that practice. So if you're just 2 or 3, that can be really, really devastating when somebody is sick or gets disabled. So it does allow you to remain in control and self-employed. So other things, managing this increased overhead. You really need to use your profit loss report to line item everything out, doing a percent to each line item so that you can, in comparison from year to year, so that you can really see what's going on and nip trends in the bud easily so that you can start tackling these things. And you absolutely, as a manager, should hold your billing staff, billing service accountable for achieving MGMA AR ratios or better. That's something that I usually put in the bonus potential for administrators, is that you will, part of your bonus will be achieving staffing AR expense ratios for your specialty or better. And then involving the team with contests. And whoever has the best idea that makes or saves the practice money gets a prize. I like to do that on a quarterly basis. And maybe it's a $50 gift certificate, and whoever the idea has to make or save more than $50, but they get a prize. And then in one of my pediatric practices, the best idea for the year got an airline ticket that the doctors bought vaccines and stuff with credit cards that they got airline miles, and instead of using them just for themselves, they gave the person with the best idea. And she was in tears when she won, and it was just so heartwarming, and it's such a great idea. So it's also important to refresh the look of your office. And marketing people say that colors and things change and decor changes about every 7 to 8 years. So encourage your physicians to put on at least a fresh coat of paint with some of the more current trendy colors, and think about what your patients want. Think outside the box. What is it that they want now? So those are really important things. And, again, it has to be comfortable, and the way patients think about the way an office looks is that if it's outdated decor, in their minds, it means outdated medicine. And if you still have macrame plant holders and scene wallpaper, that screams 70s, and they're going to think you're just way behind on the current standard of care. So, this is you. You're supposed to be doing all these things with, you're supposed to have a good, efficient process, trained and qualified staff, implementing new technology, and there's a lot out there that we need to, just not do everything the way we've always done it, but really, embracing some of this new technology that can make things more efficient. And you have to focus on service, customer service. That is critical, and that especially if you're a specialist, that you have all these people that are your customers. It's not just your patients. It's also your referring doctors, their staff, the hospitals, insurance. All these people are your customers. This is I actually saw an administrator have one of these buttons on his lapel and said, he would just point to this when people would say that and say, remember, this is a no-no. And I think we need to instill this in our staff that, yes, we have to embrace change, and that we can't just rely on, but we've always done it this way. The thing that drives me the most insane is when I still go into practices and they have fully implemented an EHR and they're still using charts as a backup, because somehow, some way, these physicians just look at that like a security blanket. And what I've had to do is say, do you realize how much money you're spending with these two systems? And I had to cost it out in terms of, the labor costs, the chart costs, everything. And the staff really wanted to just go to EHR. So sometimes you just have to put it in dollars and cents and say, you're spending about $50,000 a year, by doing this duplicate system. That makes no sense. You cut the cord and just go to the EHR. But we need to really look at office flow and be looking at all these processes and involving the team to try to say, what can we do to streamline this stuff, So Lean Six Sigma is great. It really combines Lean, which is speed, and Six Sigma is quality. And I think in medicine, I love this concept because we need to do both, We can't just do one or the other. So there are lots and lots of books and trainings on that. So again, you have to flowchart it all out with your staff about change. These are all the steps that we do presently on the top, but maybe we need to just pare it down into these 4. And that's where you should be striving for always. And, things like this, we can look at a technology instead of, yelling out the hall when you need a medical assistant, have monitors or have a signal system. I have one dermatologist that they have headsets, the derm does and the staff, and they're just whispering to each other when they need something. And they're using technology very effectively. The same office, they have a charging station, in their reception area. That's what patients want now. And in another practice, one of my allergy practices, they have little folding tables like TV trays so that patients can put their laptop on while they're waiting. So things like that you have to think about, that maybe this is something that we need to do now. So, and again, scribing. Thinking about changing, you might have to convince your physicians that it's time to really think about utilizing a scribe, and maybe it's just an electronic one, not a real one. So I have usually been able to show cost effectiveness in every specialty, including primary care, that it makes sense to use some sort of a scribe function. And I have no conflicts of interest. It's just to show that there's technology coming along the way too. So think about that, because if you can see 2 patients a day, it usually pays for itself, 2 more. So other things, market force changes, decreasing reimbursement, or stabilization. You must always periodically analyze your managed care contracts and really analyze them, because if you don't, they're just going to be evergreen and they roll over and over and over again. So you need to figure out and it's not hard to do, it's just a little time consuming at first, but you need to run a report to determine your top 20 to 25 CPT codes that represent 80% of your business. And that's really important. And then you have to develop a spreadsheet for that to submit to insurance plans, and they will and they must respond to you. They take their time sometimes, but you tell them, I want to know what my contract rate is, not what you're paying me, but what is my contract rate, and how do I have any multiple contracts with you, insurance company? And you submit that to the provider relations and get your contract rate allowables, and then enter those on an Excel spreadsheet and enter your Medicare rates for your locality. So you're going to, calculate then what your contract rate is as a percentage of Medicare, and you can consolidate all those on one Excel worksheet. So then you can take a look at this and really see, okay, if I've got, these are dollars that they're paying me, but this is a percent to Medicare, and I'm going to look at all of these and say, okay, XYZ insurance company, it represents really low volume. We don't even have that many patients of it, and it's low rates. That's when you definitely need renegotiate or drop or threaten to drop. If it's high volume and somewhat low rates, you're going to have to be more careful. But you do need to do this so that you can renegotiate your contracts, keep a good calendar, and making sure that you are knowing when it's up for renegotiation. You will be a hero to your physicians if you do this. So other things that are very important is all the labor law changes. Every year, I usually subscribe to the California Chamber of Commerce. They have a really good update on all the new labor laws. and that's really great, and you do need to do this. So this is just a joke. I think some physicians would feel that this is good management, but you, as always, know this is not. And you are the coach, and you are the team player. So you do need to know all your state laws, keep abreast on that, explaining to your physicians about exempt versus non-exempt and overtime. Absolutely instilling a progressive disciplinary process. I still find that that is not, done. Verbal, written, suspension, termination. Termination should never be a surprise because you as a manager have outlined this and you are following this. So as I try to tell my physicians, just like documentation is your savior in professional liability claims, documentation is your savior in labor law. So you do have to write this down and make sure that it goes in their employee file. They sign it, you sign it, the employee signs it, and so forth. And then I think today having good employment practices liability insurance is really a good idea too, just to make sure you're protected. So, that's I think this is becoming more and more of a challenge. I hear every day. I can't even tell you how many of my managers call me with these stories about things that are happening with their staff, and it's just it's something that I think is what contributes to physician and manager burnout, is just all the aspects of dealing with staff and finding good staff. And that's really critical. I was doing this program out in for the San Joaquin Medical Society managers, and they were saying how awful it is that all the Bay Area people are siphoning off all their workforce with higher rates, and people are willing to drive an hour or so or more just for higher rates. And so they have to work really hard to try to encourage people to stay in the community and work for them. And so that's that was really surprising to me that they're having such a problem, and it might be a problem for you all out there too. So you have to be very creative, and you have to have a good work culture and a good work environment, and tout that, when you're advertising. It can't be just a bland old dry ad. It's got to be very creative and making those people, creating that desire for them to change, to leave someplace else and come to work for you. So that's critically important. So I am worried about this, the MD and manager burned out. Every year, Medscape does some studies on this, and this is the latest one about which physician specialties are the most burned out according to this survey, and which ones have the happiest marriages and are happy. And it's kind of an interesting study if you want to take a look at it. You can show that to your specialty, whatever it is. But, I think that for managers, again, you have to learn to delegate. You can't take on everything and just do it all yourself. Your job is to actually create your replacement by trading and making sure that you have other people that can do some of the things that you do. That is your job. So you have to work with your doctors to find ways to recapture the joy of medicine, and for both of you, seeking good work-life balance with families and hobbies. I still teach my transition from training to practice, and I was just down in the Kaiser Family Practice residence in Southern California, and I start that out by, asking them, besides medicine, what are your interests and hobbies? What do you like to do for fun? And they think that's kind of weird, but I said, this is really important because I want you to have other things in your life other than just medicine, because you will be a happier person and you will be a more effective doctor. And when it comes time to retire, you'll be able to retire because you'll have these other interests. And that's what I'm concerned about some of my physicians, that medicine was the only thing in their life and they don't know what to do with themselves afterwards. So Dr. Drummond was very good about talking to me about this, and I said, no conflicts, but I said, can I use this on a slide? And he said, absolutely, and some of your key tips, and I think it's a really, really good book. So if you want to get this, I have that. There it is. And these are the takeaways that I like from this, is that he encourages physicians and managers to keep a life calendar, not just your work calendar, but your life calendar. And if you are with a significant other, you have intentional date nights that you plan for and put on the calendar, that you both create bucket lists of what you want to do, before the end of your life, like that movie, and that you're, checking them off the list. And I love this. It's like taking care of yourself can give you the energy you need to take care of others, and that's patients or your staff. And so please remember that, because I think that's a great quote. And so because that's what I'm concerned about, is that we're all moving into, and this is something that, you might have to deal with, and that's risky physician behavior. And the senior doctor, this is just a joke, why slow down when you're having fun? But at some point, it is time to retire. And I always show this. This is a big article in the San Francisco Times. As lawyers, too, all the baby boomers don't know what to, they don't want to retire. And, at some point it is time. So, again, I like all the malpractice companies, but NorCal did have a very good Claims RX on this. And if you get a chance, I'm sure they'll share it with you, but it was excellent. And it talks about all of these types of things. And it's something that is, very difficult, because physicians, I like this quote. They spend all day talking to people, and the physician friends that have retired report loneliness and isolation, and so that's something that's a very concern. So maybe it's working part-time. You can find a way to have your doctor scale down, which is great. And you do need to, deal with this. So at some point, tactful explanation of any type of problem in clear, concise language. It's your job to help them see why it's a problem: financial, operations, HR, liability, and costs and dollars to the organization. And your job is to give very specific recommendations to correct the problem. So probably the saddest thing I've had to deal with was a doctor who definitely needed to retire, and it was very, very difficult for all of us. We all got involved, and we had to get a lawyer involved, and we had to get an HR specialist involved. And at one point I even said to him, I said, you took that Hippocratic oath, the first do no harm. That's really important. But he didn't want to retire. He didn't want to stay home. He didn't know what to do with himself. But at some point, it becomes a risk to the organization when they start making mistakes, start to have some dementia. You might have to call in. We had to call in a neuropsych, a doctor, to evaluate. It was all a very sad situation. But, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, aging, all of those things are things that I think most administrators never thought they'd have to deal with. But yet those are changes that happen in our physicians, and we have to help them deal with that. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions now. If you have any stories or questions or anything you'd like to share, or any good results that you've had in implementing change, we would like to hear from you. I don't think we can do online, right? It's just in the chat box, right? Bria?
Yes, we have a question box located on the right of your screen, so we can wait a couple seconds for any questions to come in. Is there anything you'd like to add while we wait for some questions?
No, I just thank you for attending. I always do. I really appreciate you listening, and if I can be of help in any way, you can always email me or call, and I'll be happy to try to help you. And just remind me that you attended the webinar, so I always give that little perk for people who have attended my webinars.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we'll just give a couple more seconds and see if anyone has any questions.
I wanted to leave some time, and if I need to go over anything or I went too fast, let me know, and I'll scroll back or whatever I need to do.
I received a thank you, Deborah. This was great.
Oh, that's nice. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Always want to help.
Okay, well, if we do not have any questions today, then we can just wrap this up. Once again, the presentation slides, actually, we just got one in.
Oh,
My doc
okay.
is great, but his staff is not organized and frustrating. What's a good way to tell him?
Well, again, is that your job, that's part of the managing up, is that you need to have the courage to talk to your bosses about what you believe is right. And, never be afraid to do that if you do it, like I said, in a very tactful way, giving, very concrete examples. And like I said, why it's a problem. Either it's creating morale issues, it's creating financial issues by not a good workflow or costing overtime, for example, or things like that. Break it down into, like I said, that one slide, if it's a financial cost, if it's an HR, if it's a morale problem. And I think most importantly, you have to have the courage to, I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but, I always like to tell people to set, some rules for the practice about, you've got to, with your staff, you have to get a raise or continued employment. You have to do your job well according to your job description. You have to have superlative customer service with the patients, and you have to be a team player with the staff and your supervisors and the physicians. And it's not enough to do 2 out of the 3, it's 3 out of the 3. And when you hold firm to that, and when you ask the physicians, I need to do this to manage effectively, and I know what I'm doing with this, and please let me do this because I will build a good team. But they all have to be team players, and if somebody's got to go, I'll give them every chance. I'll go through that disciplinary process, verbal warnings, written warnings, suspension, and then termination. And therefore, it is their choice not to be a good staff member because I gave them all the reasons why they need to change their behavior. I gave them ways to change their behavior, and I gave them time to change their behavior. That's what the labor law attorneys tell us, is that you as an administrator need to give the people those 3 things. And if you have done that and they choose not to, adhere to that, then firing should not be a surprise. Termination should never be a surprise with your people, because if you've done your job well, they know what the process is and what they needed to do to correct that. So have the courage to do it. That's all I can say. Have the courage, and doing it in a very professional way by explaining why this is a problem. Hopefully I've answered your question.
Thank you. The next question is, are you seeing any foundation or hospitals buying up OBGYN practices? Is this a new trend?
Yes. Yes. They're doing that. I can tell you up in Northern California, but I don't want to mention which one. But yes, they are. Most of the foundations want to have almost every specialty. So although I don't know, they tend not to. The hospital and foundations don't tend to, fold in derm and ophthalmology that much. But maybe that'll change too. But yes.
Thank you. The next question is, a big change impacting doctors now is the issue of opioid prescribing. Any suggestions reintroducing the doctor that finds himself or herself on MB probation, or introducing the probation to the practice and patients?
I'm not sure what you want me to say about that. Are you saying that is it well known in the community too, that everybody is aware of that? That's really a devastating blow. I think that's what I always try to tell my physicians. Don't do anything in your practice that you wouldn't want spread all over the newspaper, because that's going to be devastating to your practice. So I think, with all this opioid thing, you have to hold firm. You have to have good policies and procedures. You have to have a double lock cabinet if you have any controlled drugs. If you are going to leave the practice, you have to dispose of them appropriately. But, I think that you just have to hold firm and not be kowtowed by the patients, because, I have risk management background too. And I've never seen it fail that those patients that beg and plead for these drugs, when they start getting addicted or they start having some side effect, they're the first ones that are going to turn around and sue that doctor for malpractice. So the doctor isn't doing those patients a favor by caving in to their needs. But, if if you've already been known about that, you're just going to have to do your best to, say no to patients, try to build back trust and confidence in the physicians and within the community, and, try to get some good Yelp ratings and things like that to counteract any bad ones. I'm not sure if that's what they wanted, but I'm just thinking off the top of my head.
She also added that it is now mandatory that it be reported to patients before the patient can see the doctor.
Yeah, well, that's difficult, and I think that the best thing that you can do as administrator is just saying that you have changed your policies. We're going to adhere to all these, and you just have to do that. You're going to have to bite the bullet. So it's a good warning for everybody else in the audience that don't get yourself in this situation, because you sure as heck don't want to have to deal with that. And I think you just have to be really honest and straightforward and say, we've changed all of our policies and procedures, and we're here to help you, and we're going to do a good job, but this is what we are going to do from here on forward.
Thank you. The next question is, how do the private equity investors make their money? By reducing salaries?
They make their money by trying to get a 15% return on their investment. So for at least 3 to 5 years. So they are going to look for ways to save money on either expenses or consolidating management oftentimes. So you'll see that, for example, in some of the derm acquisitions, where they might have had a practice manager in each location, they might have one practice manager managing 3 practices. So they try to save money on the administration, on staffing, and then they also try to motivate the doctors to be more productive, to bring in more revenue. So all of that is from the goal that they're going to make their 15% return on their investment over at least 3 to 5 years, and that's every month. So, that's my problem with private equity, is that the first go-around is usually pretty good. But then when those people make back their money and make a good return on their investment, then they sell it, and they sell it for a big dollar. So then that next group has to to try to make that 15% on return on investment. So it really does start squeezing, and the doctors and the managers get squeezed, and productivity has to increase to be able to make that return. So that's why I always try to encourage everybody, be very, very careful about that.
Okay, so we have no further questions for the day. If you have any other questions that were not covered, please reach out to Deborah directly. Once again, the presentation slides will be emailed to all participants and will be available on the website for members only, as well as we will be sending a quick survey for your feedback, as it is very important to us. If you have any additional questions, please reach out directly. Thank you everyone for attending, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.